Hey everyone, it's Andrew with Weekend Warrior Workshop, and today we're going to make a lightsaber. Alright, so if you guys saw the video that I did last week introducing myself and explaining what this channel was going to be about, then you guys know that I'm a geek and I like doing kind of prop recreations. And right now I'm really into wood turning, so what I decided to do is put them together and I'm going to turn a lightsaber on the lathe. Now, I've tried doing this a few times, and I've kind of had a little bit of trouble with choosing the right type of wood that wasn't going to chip out with the fine details that you have to get into a lightsaber. And so I've made about 3 of them, so I've got a design that I like. The lightsaber that we're going to do today is going to be lightly based off of Luke Skywalker's lightsaber, with the main difference being that the pommel is going to be quite different, and it's not going to have the activation box on the side, because those are things that you can't get when you are turning on a lathe. Alright, so please excuse the mess in the back. I'm still trying to get some things organized. But this is my lathe stand. The lathe that I have is a 10 by 18 inch lathe from Harbor Freight. You know, I know Harbor Freight kind of gets a bad rep, but you know, it works really well. I've had it for about 8 months, and it works really well. The only thing that I have a problem with is that though it is a variable speed, meaning that it has multiple speeds on it, in order to change speeds, you have to release this little set screw on the motor down here, and you have to lower the motor so that it doesn't have so much tension, and change the belts around. So I typically just stick with the second highest speed, which it shows down here. The second highest speed is the 2200 RPM. And so that's what I stick to most of the time. But I just kind of wanted to show you some of the things that I've got going on this lathe that don't come standard. The first thing is this. This is a 4-chuck jaw from Nova. I got this off of Amazon. It came with 3 different sets of chuck jaws that you can change out. They're a little bit of a pain, so I try not to change them out that often. But this, for me, I found is the safest way to turn really anything. I've turned a few bowls using a faceplate, but typically as soon as I can, I try and get into this chuck. The second thing is I changed out the 4 or 6 inch tool rest that came with the lathe with a 10-inch one, and this helps a lot specifically with spindle turning things that are quite a bit longer. I've been making a few pens, and for the pens, that 4 or 6 inch rest is fine, but doing something like I'm going to do today where it's going to be between 10 and 13 inches, this 10-inch rest helps a lot. Alright, the last thing I want to show you guys that does not come stock on this lathe is this live center. I picked this up at Rockler for about 20 bucks, and it's great. I use it as really my main live center now. The one that it comes with is this one right here, which has this shoulder here, which does help it from splitting the wood if you try and push it in with too much pressure, where this one, if you use too much pressure, can split your wood. But I found that it's really helpful. You can get a lot closer to where you want with this as opposed to with the shoulder. And when I'm making something like a screwdriver or an ice cream scoop or a bottle opener, using this just helps you get a more accurate center. So now that you guys have seen the lathe that I have and the tools that I'm working with, let's get this blank on the lathe and start turning. Alright, so the wood that I'm turning with right now is called leopard wood. I actually don't see this in very many places. I haven't seen it at a Rockler. I got this on a website called Woodworker Source, which I'll link below. If you do not have a good hardwood lumber dealer near you, Woodworker Source has a great selection of hardwood boards and turning blanks and plywood that you can choose from, and they will ship it to you. The only downside is that you have to pay for shipping, which with wood, with the weight of it, does get kind of expensive. But if you don't have a hardwood dealer near you, it's probably going to be the next best option to a Rockler or a Woodcraft. So I've only turned this type of wood once. I turned it to make a handle for one of my Thor's Hammer woodworking mallets. And as I remember, it turned pretty nice, so we'll see how it goes. I'm just going to show you how I find the center on these. I'm only going to worry about finding the center on one side, and I'll explain that in just a second. So what I do is I have the center finder here. It was like $6 on Amazon. It was super cheap, and it has a square inset right here. And so you just put that square inset on there, take a pen, mark it, and you have a mark there. And I do it from all four corners just in case I have a blank that isn't perfectly square. And if it's not perfectly square, these lines won't match up perfectly. So as you can see, this blank is, it's more or less perfectly square, but you can see that the lines didn't match up perfectly. And so that's why I do it from all four corners just in case. Alright, so the way that I've chosen to mount these types of blanks on my lathe is actually relatively easy. This side right here is the side where I marked my center. I'm not sure if you can see that very well. This side I didn't mark anything because this side is just going to go straight into my chuck. And I don't worry about rounding it off. There's slots in the side of this because it's open all the way that this will fit in as a square. And I'm just going to tighten it down a little tiny bit, but give some room so that I can move it. And so it's just barely tightened up in there. And I'm going to take the tailstock and I'm going to move it right into the center. Lock it down. Tighten it up. So now I know that this side on the tailstock is in the center. And this fits pretty nicely in here, so it's not going to move around a lot. So as I tighten this all the way, tightening it the wrong way, as I tighten it all the way, it'll push itself into the center, and then I just make sure that I go through and I use both holes to tighten, and this thing is in here pretty steadily, and it should be good to go. And then all I have to do is position my rest the way that I want it. And then I will shut up and get turning. Alright, so I've gone ahead and repositioned my lathe so that the light is a little bit better, which is just one of the many great things of having a lathe stand on wheels. And in case you guys want, I will be making a video in a little while going over the design that I have for my lathe stand and my workbench, which are almost identical, and explaining, you know, the pros and cons of it, why I went with the design that I did. So before I start turning, I just want to do one last thing and show you the tools that I'm going to be using. I'm mostly going to be working with these carbide tip tools. These are from, I believe the brand is Simple Woodturning on Amazon. I'll put a link to these as well. They are fairly inexpensive and they work really well. They have replaceable inserts just like all the carbide tools. I do have a set of traditional wood turning tools, more like this, the skew. These are from Harbor Freight when I got my lathe. Lathe is great, tools are meh. So just keep that in mind. If you want one of these lathes, Harbor Freight's gonna have the best price. This is the exact same lathe as I believe it's called the Excelsior at Rockler. And Grizzly has a lathe like this that's the exact same thing, probably made in the same factory. They're just different color and branded differently. And the only reason I'm saying that you should go get it at Harbor Freight is because they're most likely going to have some sort of coupon or discount or sale going on, and you're going to be able to get it at a better price. However, I would recommend getting tools somewhere else. These are okay if you're just starting out, but at the same time, if you get the lathe and then you have the tools and you're like, oh, these tools aren't cutting very well, maybe I'm not cut out for this, maybe this just isn't for me, try some different tools. Try some better tools. Buy one new chisel that is high quality that you can try out. Because while these work and are okay, they're definitely not the best, and don't get discouraged if these chisels aren't working for you. I have them here just in case I need them. I don't really use them a lot for this. I use those carbide tools, and then I'll be using this a lot, which is a parting tool from Robert Sorby. I got this from Rockler as well. There was a parting tool that came in that Harbor Freight set, and it was just no good. So I'm going to be using this a lot for some of the smaller details, and getting some of those curves and details and shapes in there. So once again, I'm going to shut up and start turning. Alright, first things first, I'm going to turn the lathe on. I'm going to try and get this into a almost perfect, or as perfect as I can, cylinder. Get it all round, and then I'll start working on the details. Always remember, when you're turning, you need to be wearing eye protection, face protection, some sort of protection for your face. Right now I'm just wearing glasses, but I've got a face shield for woods that are a little more splintery and kind of go all over the place. And once you start sanding, you really need to have some lung protection on. So it is all the way around. There are no more flat spots on this piece. So I'm just going to go through and use this little detail bit. I'm going to use the square working bit. So I'm just going to use this tiny little uniform finish on the piece, and then I will start with this. All right, so it's looking a little bit more uniform right now. When I was making the other ones that I've made, and I've made 3 of them, what I was doing was using a picture that I found on Google as a reference. And of those 3, this one that I made, and this is made out of Osage orange or Osage orange. I found it at Rockler. I'd never heard of the wood before, but it was this very bright yellow. And as you can see, this, what you're seeing in the camera, it is that yellow. And so this is the one that feels most comfortable to me. I feel like this is the closest to the design that I want. And so I'm going to use this as a reference for doing the details on this. And so starting right now, I'm going to be using that Robert Sorby parting tool for a lot of those little details. Which you may think the first one I was with and it's so street that as I was turning, there was so much about down, and saying members of the perfect. So we'll start about this orange, really about like nice, smooth finish it out. Also these my favorite concern. So I show pictures of all four of this one, the upper part of the part that is letterboard again. So as you can see, I've kind of got this top part, which is like the emitter. This is where the blade would come out. I've got that done. I'm going to turn the rest of this down just a little bit because this is really the part where your hand is going to be, and it feels a little bit big for me. And definitely quite a bit bigger than this one is. So I'm going to turn that down a little bit to make it a little bit easier, and then we'll get started working on these grooves here. Alright, so here is the section where I'm going to kind of throw out a little bit of a safety precaution. The way that I'm about to start cutting these, I'm going to be using this parting tool, and I'm not entirely sure that this parting tool was designed to do what I'm about to do with it. Just remember, I am in no way a professional woodworker. Everything that I will do on this channel is something that I've kind of taught myself or got inspired to do by someone on YouTube. If I'm doing something on here that is wrong or unsafe, and you know what you're talking about, like you're a professional woodworker, or you've been turning for years, please let me know. I'm going to do it because this is the best way, this is the way that I've gotten the best results with the other 3 lightsabers that I've done, because I've tried a couple of different methods of doing this. So I'm going to zoom it in a little bit so you guys can see some of the finer details that I'm working on. But just remember, this is just me showing you guys what I'm doing. It's not necessarily a how-to or a guide that I think you should follow explicitly. Alright, so I just finished turning the lightsaber, and then I noticed that I hadn't been filming the whole time. Really all that I did since I repositioned the camera is I got these grooves set in here, and to do that I just used this parting tool. That's what I was talking about a little bit earlier. So I just used the parting tool to set these different insets in, and the part of it that I wasn't sure if it was all that safe or if it was the right way to use this tool is that I actually put it on its side, on the rest like this instead of like this where it's supposed to be, and I use this to get a bevel on all of these to kind of make them a little bit more rounded, a little bit more comfortable in the hand. Shop safety is a really personal decision. I feel safe doing that cut, so I'm doing it because, as I said, that's how I've gotten the best results. If that's not something you feel comfortable with, don't do it, obviously. And like I said, if you know better than I do and know that this tool should not be used to do that, just let me know. I'm very open to learning some stuff from you guys. So other than putting those grooves in, I put one groove down here. This bottom part is really just going to be the pommel. The pommel on Luke's lightsaber is quite a bit more detailed than this, but with turning, I'm not going to be able to get that type of detail in it because there's all sorts of cutouts and stuff. So it's just a really simple groove here, and I rounded over the bottom here. And then I started to part off the end down here just a little bit so that when I start sanding, I can get more into here. So the last thing that I'm going to do before sanding starts is I'm going to turn this down a little bit to get to the final dimension of what I'm looking for. And that tip is really going to be very small. It's just a little nub that's up here. So I left this because it's nice to have some room so you can cut that off at the very end. So I apologize for losing that bit of me turning. As I said, I wasn't sure how this wood was going to turn out. It's looking okay. It's definitely looking better than the purple heart that I turned. But it does have some chip out, so I'm hoping I can get that out with sandpaper. Like I said, I'm going to turn this down just a little bit, and we'll start sanding. Alright, so it's sanding time. I'm not going to make you sit through and watch that. Sanding something like this is a pain. Typically sanding on the lathe goes pretty quick because this does all the work for you, and all you have to do is put some light pressure with some sandpaper. Because of all the grooves and the notches and everything, sanding this is it really is a pain. I've been doing a few of them, and they're not the easiest things to sand. But I'll just quickly explain what my sanding progression is, and then I will show you guys right before we put the finish on. I do 150, 220, 320, 400, and then after 400, I'm going to put a coat of sanding sealer on it, and that's when I'll really get to see what it's going to look like while it's finished. I let that sanding sealer dry for a little bit, and I'll sand it back with 400, do 800, 1500, and then when that 1500 is done, we'll come back and we'll apply the final finish. So I will see you. You guys will see me in a couple seconds. It's probably going to be about half an hour sanding for me. Alright, so here we are, sanded up to 400 grit. It's feeling really nice and smooth. Most of those checks have gone away, like I said. There's some of those voids and imperfections in the wood that are going to give it some great character. And so now what I do is I apply a sanding sealer. This is Bullseye Seal Coat. Honestly, this was the only one that I could find on Amazon, but I've seen it at Rockler, so people obviously use it. The one thing about sanding sealer that I've noticed is that sometimes when I try and go back and sand in some tight spaces after I've applied a sanding sealer, it'll kind of take the color of whatever sandpaper I'm using, and it'll kind of get burnt into the wood. So for example, the grit after 400 that I use is 800. My 800 grit sandpaper is black. So if I went through and I tried to get into some of these tight spaces by folding up the sandpaper and kind of sticking it into those spaces, I've noticed on the past couple lightsabers I've had to go back in because it turned all of these things black. So typically what I do after I apply the sanding sealer is I don't worry too much about those little spots, and when I go back with the 800 and the 1500 grit, I just kind of get the surface, because what I'm really trying to do with that is get the surface to feel really nice and smooth. And you're really not going to feel the inside of these, so I don't worry about that too much. They're already sanded to 400. So I'm going to go ahead and apply the sanding sealer. This is where we'll kind of get a little bit of a glimpse at what it might look like when it's finished. And I'm not sure, like I said, I've only used this wood once, so I'm not sure how much the color is going to change with the sanding sealer. But, ooh, the color actually changed quite a bit. So I apply this with the lathe off. I don't think I ever read the instructions. I don't know if this is what you're supposed to do, but this is how I've done this. This is how I finish most of my non-pen turning projects. I finish all of my pens with a CA glue finish, but pretty much everything else gets this treatment with the sanding sealer after 400, going up to 1500, and then you guys will see what I finish it with in just a couple minutes here. But you really want to get it into all of these little notches, get it into all those spots. Let's see. Alright, this is actually looking really nice. It's got a much darker color than I expected it to. Turning it, it's very, very light. But when you apply the sanding sealer, it really brings out the grain. It's great. I would also recommend probably wearing gloves with the sanding sealer. The sanding sealer gets a little sticky. I am not wearing gloves just because I never follow my own advice, but this is one of those do as I say, not as I do moments. So we're almost got this on. This is going to have to dry before we sand it back, but it dries pretty quickly. Most of the stuff down here is already pretty dry. So typically what I'll do is after I apply it, I will turn the lathe on so that it's spinning and it'll dry a little bit quicker. And I will leave this spinning for, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes or so, and I'll come back. I'll sand it with 400, and then I'll go on with 800 and 1500, and I'll be right back with you guys before we apply the finish. Alright, so I'm back. This is all sanded up to 1500. It is super smooth. And so now is finishing time. And I'm really hoping that this will turn up on camera because the way that this looks when it's finished, the difference is just staggering. So what I use is Renaissance wax. So Renaissance wax is a microcrystalline wax polish, as it says on the can. I actually originally got this to prevent rust on some Game of Thrones sword replicas that I bought. And then as I started turning, I saw someone use it on a video on YouTube, I believe, and they actually sell this stuff at Rockler in the Woodturning section. It is not going to give it a high gloss finish like Shellawax or Yorkshire Grit or Woodwax 22 or pretty much anything that Nick Zametti uses that gives him that high gloss polish. This isn't going to give that. This is going to give it more of a semi-gloss polish. But the way that I apply this is I start with the lathe off, just like with the sanding sealer, and I just come in and I put a very liberal amount on my paper towel, and I try and get this put very liberally all over the entire piece. And once I get it as coated as I can into these notches and everything, I will turn it on and I'll start buffing it out. And when I do this, I use two different paper towels. I use one that I'm using right now to put the wax on, and I'll start buffing with this one to kind of get as much of the wax that I have on this paper towel onto the piece as possible. And then I'll switch over to a clean paper towel and finish the buffing with that. And I will typically add anywhere between 2 and 3 coats of the Renaissance wax. I've noticed that really anything more than that doesn't really change the finish. So it really depends on the wood and how it looks after the second coat. So I'm going to turn the lathe on, and hopefully we'll get to see this nice change in finish here, because this looks phenomenal in person, the change that you get when you start buffing the wax in. And hopefully you guys will be able to see the shine that starts to come out of this. And like I said, it's not going to be a high gloss, but there will be some gloss. And I think that when I start to add 3 coats on top of that second, if I add a 3rd coat, that does give it a little extra shine. So if I have a project that I want a little more gloss than the semi-gloss that I have, I'll do a 3rd coat. Just going to add a little bit more here. Doesn't look like I have enough in some of these crevices. And I will use the clean rag to try and get into these crevices with the wax. So that is the buffing with the waxed towel. Now I'm going to come in with a clean towel, kind of get into these crevices. You know, sanding may be a pain, but you know, in any project that you have, and if you've done any woodworking, you know, you do the sanding because it's worth it. When you have a finished project and you're putting a finish on it, that sanding just becomes, it's in the past, and it was way worth it. So even though it took me maybe 30 or 40 minutes to sand up this whole thing, once the finish is applied to it, there's no wondering why we sand so much. Alright, so that is the first coat of wax on there. And there's already a decent gloss on it now. You guys can actually see the light gleaming off of it. But I'm going to go ahead and put on a second coat. Based on what I'm looking at from the first coat, I don't think I'm going to need 3. I don't expect there to be I don't have a need for this to be a really high finish piece. So I'm going to put just one more coat on. I'm going to use the same towel that I've used for both. Put one more coat on. And then this will be finished up. So once I'm done with this, I'll take it off the lathe, clean up both of the ends, and you guys will get to see it next to the other ones that I've made. Alright, so it is parted off the lathe. All I've got to do is clean up the little nub on each end, sand that up to 1500 just like the rest of it, put some wax on it, and it should be good to go. But as you guys can see, this has a really interesting grain pattern. Leopard wood is just, it's really cool. I mean, and it is cooler from this side than if you turn it over here. It just kind of looks a little grainy. But it's a very interesting, very unique wood. It is super smooth. It feels very comfortable in my hand. And let me take a look and compare this one to the Osage orange one, which I was basing it off of. All right, and I'll zoom out just a little bit. And they do look pretty similar. I think this one may be a little bit thinner. You know, things are off, and that's kind of what I did on purpose. I didn't want two identical ones. I just wanted to use this one for reference. As you can see, I put a D-ring. This is actually a picture hanger on the bottom of this one, and I also did the same thing to the bottom of the one that I turned out a red heart. The entire reason I actually wanted to turn these is because I will be going to Star Wars Galaxy's Edge at Disneyland later this week, and I want to bring these with me. I don't know if I'm going to bring both of them or just one of them. Right now I'm thinking I'm going to bring both of them because I really like the color of the red heart, but I like the way that this one feels. So that is why I decided to do this. I am not bringing this one with me because I made it on this channel. I'm actually going to throw this one up on my Etsy store. And for that reason, I'm not going to put one of these rings on it yet. I'll leave an option in the description on my store that if whoever buys it wants a ring on it so they could put it on a belt clip, they can. Otherwise, they can just have it like this. So I'm going to sand those up and you know, get them finished up. You guys get to see the final product. I just wanted to thank you guys. Hopefully you guys stuck around to the end. I'm hoping that this wasn't too long of a video. I lost some footage there, so hopefully it's not too terribly long. But I thought this would be a fun first project video on my channel, and I hope you guys liked it. Please subscribe, leave a comment if you liked it, if you didn't like it. Just let me know what you guys are thinking, what kind of videos you guys like to see. So that's it. I will show you guys some of the pictures of the other lightsabers I've made, and have a great weekend.